Thanks, Buhle. The EFF wants political parties and civil society organizations to unite in protests against the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority and government. The party wants to put some pressure on the health authority and government to speedily approve Russia's Sputnik V vaccine and China's Sinovac. They say South Africa's slow vaccination program is worsened by the country's failure to secure more vaccines. But is a protest the best way forward, given the rising COVID-19 cases in Gauteng? To give us a point of view, we're joined by social analyst Tessa Dooms. Tessa, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Is a protest the way to go about it, especially as we have heard just on Friday the acting health minister, Mamoloko Ngubane, warning that protests are some of the biggest drivers when it comes to the spread of COVID-19?
Good morning. A protest is certainly not a good idea under the current conditions, particularly. The EFF is known to have had quite a safe protest. About a year ago, we remember when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and the EFF managed to have a protest that was quite well socially distant at that point when they were taking the knee. Since then, we've seen not only the EFF, but many members of society engaging in large gatherings, large political gatherings, without the necessary protections. And I think that that is where the difficulty comes in, because on the one hand, you're protesting for health reasons and for something that will bring good health to people, but you're doing it in a way that is endangering those very people's lives. And I think the EFF would be wise to reconsider this, because while they may be able to, if they can, at their own protest, control what happens on that day, the kind of messaging that it brings into society, this idea of defiance of the lockdown rules as well, is going to endanger lives that they cannot protect in the general public.
The EFF is essentially reiterating its stance when it comes to government diversifying its vaccine procurement. We heard EFF leader Julius Malema saying that he believes that approving the vaccine, the reason why there's this delay is because it's all politically centered. And when it comes to this argument, how much substance is there to it, especially considering what we've seen with the J&J vaccine and those doses that had to be destroyed because of contamination?
I mean, the EFF's complaint is legitimate, and especially to the sense that we don't really have a lot of transparency when it comes to the deal making that's happened around vaccines. We don't have an understanding of why certain vaccines have not come, at least to the testing stage in South Africa. We do know, however, that our vaccine choices have also been based on the science that says that the variants that are present in South Africa are not necessarily covered by all vaccines that are available on the market. We haven't seen a lot of data, though, on the Sputnik and the China vaccine in terms of its ability to deal with the variants that are in South Africa, and I think we need transparency about that. That may be the reason why we're not seeing it being rolled out here, but we actually don't know. And I think one of the things that the EFF MPs have done, particularly well in committee meetings, is they have called for more transparency. They have resisted the idea that there are non-disclosure agreements around vaccines. And I think that we, as the public, do have a right to understand what the logistics are and what the deal making is, because there may be political undercurrents, but we don't have sight of that, and that in itself is a problem.
The other political aspect here, Tessa, speaks to the argument that the EFF has put forward, accusing government of using vaccines, this entire rollout program, to personally enrich themselves. I mean, we've seen the implications, especially when it comes to Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize.
Yeah, I think that's a murky argument. I don't think that we have any evidence at this point of vaccines being used for enriching. That evidence may emerge. This is South Africa. Every day is a new day, and we may come up with new information. But there's a clear distinction between COVID looting around things like PPEs, around things like the Digital Vibe scandal, and saying that there's some looting and some kind of enrichment happening in the vaccine process. I think we should keep those two things separate. I think there's already so many issues around vaccine hesitancy that we don't want to bring up ghosts that don't exist. Let's deal with the facts as they emerge. if there are some shenanigans happening around vaccines and looting, I think we need facts rather than speculation. And the EFF have in the past been very good at unearthing facts, and I think they should stay on that course rather than speculate about looting that may not be happening.
Another criticism that was brought to the forefront by the EFF is that of President Cyril Ramaphosa, another meeting with us on Tuesday, making the announcement of the country moving to lockdown level 3. The EFF has come out to say this move is an attack on its political campaigning ahead of elections, because the restrictions essentially mean that no campaigning can take place. And, you know, a contradiction, especially as they say that if there are any deaths regarding COVID-19, President Cyril Ramaphosa should be blamed. But on the other end, they're not happy with the country moving to lockdown level 3, saying that it's going to affect them come October at the polls.
Well, I think there are two parts to this. The first is we don't know that we're actually going to the polls in October. At this point, the IEC has given indications that it is rethinking that as we speak, and that it's looking for the right kind of data and seeing if it has the systems in place to actually have an election. So that's not a guarantee. But on the other hand, if the EFF cannot think about strategies and how to have a political campaign that is safe, then they have got bigger problems than just the president going to lockdown level 3. I think the lockdown level that we have right now is actually quite mild given the level of the crisis that we are in. And if the EFF, as it says, believes and cares about the working class people in this country and the people in this country that are marginalized and in the worst possible conditions, its role is not just to say that the president's got blood on its hands. Its role as a political party is to be activist and be in those communities helping promote safety rather than saying that defiance is the way to go, because ultimately it's the ANC's government. If the EFF want to lead society, they must lead society while they are not in government and make sure they set a good example rather than being reckless with the lives of people.
And what are the big dangers here with this messaging and this stance when it comes to them saying they will defy the president? I mean, what sort of message does it send to the general public?
As I said in the beginning, the big messaging concern is that the EFF may be able to control some aspects of society where it gathers. It may be able to be safer than in other places. But once you start rolling messaging, already in a climate where people are already struggling under lockdown, they're struggling with COVID, they're struggling in so many ways. When you start introducing messaging that you cannot control in the general public, you are endangering lives that you cannot protect later. You're endangering costs that you cannot count. And I think that that's the danger here for the EFF, is that they can make it about political rhetoric and they can gain support based on political rhetoric. But at the end of the day, when somebody loses their mother, when somebody finds themselves in ICU, it won't be the EFF that is there that has to make sure that the healthcare system works. And so they cannot cash the checks that they are writing with this message.
And so far, when it comes to the actual call of the vaccines and Sputnik, SAHPRA has not given any indication or response to this, to this threat that's been made. I mean, EFF has given 7 days essentially to get some sort of response, or they retaliate and get to the streets. What do you imagine then to perhaps be the response of SAHPRA? I mean, how much do they have to answer to here when it comes to the access of these vaccines?
Well, SAHPRA and the government at large have a case to answer to here in terms of how they're making vaccine choices, and especially more data and information around which vaccines are more effective and have greater efficacy and which do not. But the EFF also has other tools at its disposal other than protest. They can take this matter to court and they can force SAHPRA to engage with them. They can use Parliament. They have many seats in Parliament where they can use to engage and hold the executive to account. And I think the EFF needs to take all of those measures when it comes to this issue before going the route that is most dangerous. And I don't think we've seen that yet. The EFF has shown in the past that they're willing to take things to court. They're willing to go the legal route. They could go to the Human Rights Commission if they believe there's a human rights point to be made here. But I think there are many other avenues to pursue other than putting people's lives in danger with protests you can't control.
And the other element of this discussion is perhaps the remarks that are made by the EFF, speaking to some of the evident reason, according to them, why the vaccines are not readily available and this process isn't as smooth as it should be. They're saying that Cyril Ramaphosa is a puppet of the West and certainly involved in transactions with local partners of J&J. Surely that is really frightening information to put forward to, especially as we haven't seen the evidence.
Right, so it's frightening information because we know that, especially the idea that Cyril Ramaphosa or anyone related to him is involved with the J&J process, and that's the reason why we're stuck with the vaccines that we have. I think we need evidence rather than rhetoric, and that's the only point I can make on that. Mm-hmm. But the broader question about the international relations component of this, the question about whether we're rejecting China and Russia because of the West, I think that's also an important point. We've entered into a BRICS coalition for exactly this reason, for moments like these. And you would expect that as part of BRICS, we would be sitting around the table with Russia and China, and that they would be open and transparent about their vaccine information, that they would make those readily available to us, that we would be able to do our own internal checks and balances to make sure that the safety is on par. And the acceptance of the idea that Western countries and countries that are not in the developing country space, as it were, is going to be better and can be more trusted, that is problematic. We have to engage on the basis that we've created these partnerships with China and Russia exactly for moments like these, so that we broaden our options and that we have allies that are not only allies with us when it comes to these pharmaceutical trade-offs, but they're allies with us in these broader economic conversations that we're having. The fact that we are not engaging or we're not seeing what the outcomes of those engagements are should be worrying to us, not only for this moment, but for other crises that may emerge, because then it brings to naught the idea that we have the BRICS partnership. Why have it if you're not going to use it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that very thorough analysis and insight on this matter. Social analyst Tessa Dooms bringing us up to speed and really just reacting as the EFF wants political parties and civil society formations to come together to protest against SAHPRA when it comes to the demand that they're making for COVID-19 vaccines.